encourage you to open your Bibles to Mark chapter 1. We'll begin there. Mark chapter 1. As we begin this morning, I'd like to ask that anybody born about 1995 or later, raise your hand. If you're born 1990, tall, Andrew, raise it up there tall. Here's what I would say to you. You have never been bored in your life. And here's why that is. You have no idea what life was like before this thing you carry in your pocket every day. Because if you were born before 1995, when you flew on a plane, you either took a book with you or you read the magazine the plane provided, including the paper version of the Home Shopping Network. And if you were born before 1995, if you're on a road trip with your siblings, you made up games like license plate bingo in order to occupy your time. If you were born before 1995, if you stood in line at a coffee shop, you were either an extrovert who talked to strangers or an introvert who wondered why strangers were talking to you. And if you were born after 1995, you've never read the back of a shampoo bottle 4 times. And if you were born before 1995, you know exactly what I am talking about. Because you've never experienced boredom. Because when you're bored, you pull out your phone and you play a game and you watch a video. Your life is filled with entertainment in 30-second clips, which means your life is filled with noisy clutter. Because you don't know what boredom is. And I will admit, none of us want to return to the pre-digital world. We were driving home last night, and previously, I remember growing up when you had an AM radio in your car. That was it. Or an 8-track if you were lucky. Andrew doesn't even know what an 8-track is. But last night, we're driving home late from Memphis after doing a wedding, and I'm listening to my podcast, and she has her headphones in listening to her book. We don't even have to listen to the same thing anymore. We can entertain ourselves in our own little bubble. I also enjoy GPS. Don't you? Some of you have no idea what a Rand McNally Walmart Atlas is. But there are pros and cons to this. One of the cons is that we live in a world where we are never unplugged. And we never have downtime. And because we have always hated the boredom of life, we have now filled that boredom with entertainment. We pull out this little supercomputer from our pockets and we plug back into the world. And all those peaceful moments we call boredom that could have led us closer to moments of meditation and even prayer are now swallowed up by a digital carnivore. And the reality is we're not even alone in peace and quiet when we shower because we probably have the news or a podcast playing then. Or music. Because they make waterproof speakers. And what all that noise has done is has robbed us of being present. It has robbed us of being present with other people. When we go out to dinner or we go out to lunch, we don't know how to talk to each other anymore. How many people do you see, and I know my family's one of them, where you go out to dinner and they're all sitting there together on their phone, not talking, but plugged in to the digital world. It has robbed us of being present with ourselves. Because part of why we escape into the digital world through our phones is the uncomfortableness of having to deal with ourselves sometimes. And it's much easier to be entertained and to think all by yourself. And most importantly, it has robbed us of being present with God. I appreciate Eric's comments, but I want you to know something, that this morning we're not going to talk about the idea of solitude within a community, although I understand the need for that. We're not going to talk about fellowship with each other as much as we're going to talk about the solitude we need to find to find peace with God and connection with God. And in this series of our annual theme that we've called Finding the Way, where we are following Jesus as the good teacher, as our rabbi, and we're his disciples, his apprentices, we want to imitate him. We want to notice what Jesus did. So we're going to begin in Mark chapter 1. We are in Matthew 4 in the Bible class today. Mark chapter 1 is going to be really a parallel text in some ways, but I want you to notice that he goes out to a desolate place. Now, as we begin, I want you to read in verse 12 starting, "The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan, and he was with wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him." All three synoptics begin with this idea of him being out in this wilderness. Matthew 4, verses 1 through 2. We read that this morning. Luke 4, 1 through 2. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan, was led by the Spirit to the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. Here's what you may not realize, is that the word translated here, wilderness, can be translated a lot of different ways. It can be wilderness, it could be desert, it could be deserted place, it could be solitary place, it could be lonely place, it could be a quiet place. And this word is used over and over again in relation to Jesus, and we're going to see that in some text. But I mentioned this kind of as a glimpse or a preview this morning in Bible class when I said, I want you to think about something else, because I've always thought about this 40 days in the sense of Jesus being weak. And we read that the angels have to minister to him, and we think about his fleshly weakness of not eating for 40 days. This idea that Jesus goes out almost, and he weakens himself in the flesh by not eating right before he has this one-on-one heavyweight bout with the evil of the world out in a deserted place. And that sounds a lot like the way the devil operates, doesn't it? Wait for the weakest moment and then attack. And so we kind of talk about that. Jesus fasted in the desert for 40 days. He is physically weak. But here's what I want you to understand. While his flesh may have been physically weak, his spirit was not. The wilderness was not a place of weakness for Jesus. It was a place of strength. It was a place of strength because what do you think he was doing while he fasted? Fasting in Scripture is always connecting to God. It is always a spiritual strengthening. It is never a spiritual weakness. When people fast, they fast and pray. They connect to God. They do that to be with God. And so when he goes out to the wilderness, he spends 40 days fasting, but he's led by the Spirit to be connected with God. And what's really interesting is the way Mark writes Mark chapter 1. Because we leave that, we see the temptations, and then Jesus begins this ministry. And I will tell you, I don't know how long in the reading this ministry might have been, but it is logical to read it that it may have only been one day of public ministry. Certainly doesn't seem like very long. But if you read it as one day, notice then in verses 29 through 34, we read that already, that he has all of this healing, and they're bringing all of the people, at least in this one day, they're bringing all the people to Peter's mother-in-law's house to be healed. The whole city's turning up. And then what does verse 35 say? "And rising early in the morning while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon of those who were with him searched for him and found him and said, 'Everyone is looking for you.'" Jesus goes out to the wilderness for 40 days. He has this temptation. He begins his public ministry. He has this really massive, major, big day where everybody is seeking him. And what does he do the next morning? Well, it feels like if we were like him, what we would have done is we would have slept in. We might have scheduled some self-care. We might have had a brunch with the disciples and talked about the day before. But not Jesus. Jesus gets up early when it's still dark, more than likely, before anybody else, and goes out to the wilderness. It's the same word. This desolate, quiet, lonely place. Same word as wilderness. And it's interesting because verse 37 that we read, Peter's like, "Hey, Jesus, everybody's talking about you. This is exactly what we want, right? We want everybody, we want the fame, the popularity to grow. You need to come back into town because everybody's looking for you. And what's Jesus' response? No, we're going to go to the next town. And we're going to talk to them. And then we're going to go to the next town. What you see is Jesus doesn't operate like us. He's not looking to amass a crowd. He's not doing this for social media likes and a following. He's not trying to be a first century influencer. What Jesus is doing is preaching the gospel everywhere he goes. And so Peter's saying, they want to follow you. And Jesus says, no. Next town. But I want you to skip down to how Mark ends the chapter in verse 45. But he went out and began to talk freely about it and to spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter town, but was out in desolate places, and people were going to him from every quarter. Jesus, Mark says, begins in a desolate place. He stops the morning after a massive day, goes to a desolate place, and as people still continue to try to pursue him and follow him, Jesus just goes out and stays in desolate places. And the crowds still follow him. Luke chapter 6 records Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, a version of that. Not the same one from Matthew 5, I don't believe, but still the same kind of message we see. But in Luke chapter 5, it is interesting what Luke says in verses 15 through 16. Now even more about the report of him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities, but he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. Desolate places and pray. Sorry, I did not move that screen quick enough for you. When Jesus hears of the execution of John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 14, what does he do? He sent and had John beheaded in prison. That's Herod. His head was brought on a platter, given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from a boat, in a boat to a desolate place by himself. And when the crowds heard it, they followed him. He goes to a desolate place. By the way, same word for wilderness. In Matthew chapter 15, after feeding the 5,000 and healing the Canaanite woman, what does Jesus do? He went on from there, walked beside the Sea of Galilee, and went up on a mountain and sat down there. He went up to a desolate place. The night he's about to be betrayed, arrested, tried, and eventually led to death. It's no surprise he goes to the garden. And in Mark chapter 14, it says they went to Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled, said to them, my soul sorrowful even to death, remain here and watch. And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were all possible, the hour might pass from him. And while this doesn't use the same word for desolate place, we see the practice. What does Jesus do? He goes off by himself in solitude, alone, with nobody else. But what I find most interesting is what happens here in Mark chapter 6. Because it's one thing to see Jesus practice this idea of going to the desolate place and finding solitude and finding silence and what he does in those moments. It's one thing to see that, but I want you to see what he does with the disciples here in Mark chapter 6. In verse 7, it's the first time we see him sending out the 12 two by two. And I want you to just read that with me so you can see what happens. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 7, he called the 12 and began to send them out two by two and gave them authority over all the unclean spirits. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except for a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on two tunics. And he said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. And if any place will not receive you, they will not listen to you. When you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed the people should repent. And they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Now, that's what happens in Mark chapter 6. What you need to understand is that what happens while those 12 are gone is that's when actually Herod beheads John the Baptist. And then the disciples come back to Jesus later on in verse 30. In fact, the disciples return in verse 30, and then Jesus feeds the 5,000. And we realize that when the disciples return, what they want to do is they want to be able to tell Jesus about all that they've done. We've cast out the demons. We've taught all these things. Here's our report of everything that we did, that you sent us out. So in verse 30, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. And look at verse 31. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. I mean, the reality is that this going to a desolate place with the disciples is what creates the problem with feeding the 5,000, is because the crowd follows. And even when they come to Jesus, they say, "We're in a desolate place. There's no food here." But what created that? They come back and they give a report to Jesus. And what does Jesus say? You know what you need after that hard work? Solitude. A desolate place. Because they were so overrun with people, they're not even able to eat. Jesus wanted his disciples to understand and to know there is a time you need to go find a desolate place. There's a time to separate yourself from the busyness of the world around you. And by the way, at that time, we're not talking cell phones and television and mass media like we are today. We're just talking people. How much more necessary is it for us who live in this world of being constantly plugged in? I want you to think about the benefits of silence and solitude this morning. Silence is the removal of all noise. Do you realize how much noise there is in our world today? While we were in Memphis, I was Friday night and Saturday morning finishing up some things, and so I went downstairs in the hotel. There's a big restaurant, there's a coffee shop, there's a place to sit and work, and I'm doing that. But what's going on the entire time? Music. And on top of the music, it was a rather busy hotel in downtown Memphis. Apparently there was some basketball tournament. So what else is going on is there's a bunch of teenagers running in and out of the lobby the whole time. All of that noise and people talking. I went outside, and I'm downtown Memphis, so I sat on the patio. Guess what's outside? Constant traffic. There was no place that I could get away from the noise of just life. There aren't many moments of silence in our world. Most of you know that I wake up early. And I wake up early without an alarm clock at this point. And that means there's some mornings I'm up before 4 o'clock. I'm also one of these weird people that when I wake up, I get up. I don't go back to sleep. I found out years ago I just feel awful when I do. But somebody asked him, by the way, when we first got married, I did not wake up early. I would sleep right in and let Duane go to school and just see her when she came home. But not anymore. People go, why do you do that? And I will tell you why I started waking up early. Because when I had kids, the only moment of silence I could have in my life was when they were all asleep. And the only guarantee of that was at 5 o'clock in the morning. And so there's this habit that I developed of waking up early, sitting in the silence with my cup of coffee, and enjoying the absence of noise. Because I don't know if y'all know this, but our family's just loud in general. I'm loud. Duane's not loud. The other three are loud. The only time we're not loud is when we're asleep. And I still do that today. They're all gone. I like that. There's more silence. The afternoons are way more silent than they used to be. Duane hates it. I love it. But I still get up early. There are two kinds of silence, by the way. One is external, and the other one is internal. External silence is the sound around you. Internal is the sound within you, the noise within yourself. I will tell you that the external noise is a lot easier to control than the internal noise. When it comes to external noise, you can turn the TV off, you can turn the dishwasher off, you can turn your phone off, and you can have just silence. But the internal noise is that endless commentary in your mind about things going on in your life. And we've all had that. By the way, this is why all of you are anxious. It's because you have allowed the internal noise of your life to paralyze you into anxiety. And part of the reason why I think that is such a problem for us today is because of what we're talking about this morning. But the idea of silence scares us because we think if we remove the external noise, that there is no way to silence the internal noise. That internal noise is things like second-guessing something you said or did to somebody, and you realize it probably wasn't the best thing, and you just are certain you've destroyed a friendship, and you spend hours replaying that over and over in your mind. Or maybe it's that you've had lustful thoughts about somebody and you cannot let those go, and you play those over and over in your mind. Or maybe it's some decision that you made that has benefited you or maybe impacted you negatively one way or another, and you cannot stop thinking about that over and over in your mind. Maybe it's something that you want, you cannot have. Maybe it's a job you need that you did not get. But it is all these things that fill our mind and just repeat over and over and over again in our minds. And what we do is rather than go in silence and give ourselves the opportunity to declutter from that noise, we just distract ourselves with other noises. We self-medicate with things like entertainment and noise rather than connect to God. Turn to Psalm 62. Psalm 62. I want to read the first 7 verses to you. Psalm 62. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will you, all of you, attack a man to batter him, like a leaning wall, a tottering fence? They only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation, my glory, my mighty rock, my refuge is God. Trust in him, verse 8, at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. God is my rock. He's my salvation. He's my refuge. But where did the psalmist find God? In silence. Sometimes what we need to do is we need to sit in silence and connect to God, our rock, our refuge, our salvation. One of the problems is when we seek to kind of self-medicate with noise around us and the entertainment and distract us, is that gets in the way of us realizing that God is that rock and fortress and refuge and salvation. And what we've done is rather than trust in God, like verse 8 says, and rather than turn everything over to God, we've actually grabbed control of our life and we've just said, I can handle this, and I'll handle it by not thinking about it and distracting myself with other things. By the way, if you're doing that, how is that working out for you? It's not. You know what you cannot do when you fill your world with noise? You cannot take your anxieties to God in silence. And what did Paul say in Philippians 4? Do not be anxious for anything, but in all prayer and supplication let your requests be made known to God. And then what did he say after that? And the peace that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts. We don't go find enough silence to give our anxiety to God. And as long as you seek to clutter your life with more noise so you don't have to deal with the voices in your head, quite frankly, those voices are going to be a lot louder. I will tell you, it doesn't always have to be silence. I don't mow my yard anymore. For those of you who've been to my house, you may know why. My mower tried to kill me 4 times, and so we decided that we would let somebody else die. It was worth the $80 a cut. But I will tell you what one of my favorite things to do is to mow the yard. Without headphones, without anything going on, and it's because of this. Even the continuous drone of that engine becomes its own form of silence. Find something like that in your life that gives you silence. Go for a walk without a podcast. Mow your yard. Go sit on your deck and don't turn the TV on, or leave your phone inside. Leave your book inside. Go sit in silence. And then secondly is the idea of solitude. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory what solitude is. It's when you're alone. Solitude is literally when you are by yourself. You cannot be with other people and actually be in solitude. And I want to tell you this, that it is in solitude when you are alone by yourself in that silence that you actually have the time to be alone with God. And that's what this is really about, is the time to be alone with God. By the way, this is not isolation. Solitude is engagement with God. Isolation is escape from life. Solitude is safety, while isolation is danger. Solitude is how you open yourself to God. Isolation is painting a target on your back for Satan. Solitude is when you set aside the time to feed and water and nourish your soul so it can be healthy. Isolation is what you crave when you've neglected your soul. And you'd rather hold on to the guilt and the shame than to turn it over to God. Solitude is also not loneliness. Richard Foster said, loneliness is inner emptiness, solitude is inner fulfillment. When Jesus went to a quiet, desolate place, he wasn't lonely. He wasn't miserable. He wasn't bemoaning himself. He wasn't isolating himself. He was doing that to be with the Father. And what you see when Jesus does that is you see him fasting and you see him praying. You see this connection with God. Let me ask you a question by raise of hands. How many of us have ever felt disconnected from God? Raise your hand high. See, this is one of those times you need to do this so you realize you're not alone. Could it be that why we feel we are disconnected from God is because we are not making it purposeful and intentional to connect to God in our lives? Because we are not finding the silence and solitude it takes to connect to the Creator. If your life is spent with your TV on and your phone on and your radio on and around people and never in what we're talking about this morning, you will not have that connection with God, because all of your connectivity is to this world here, not the world to come. And I will tell you this, that if that's what we seek, is that kind of constant plugged-in digital entertainment, we may say that this world is not my home, but we sure act like it is, because it is our priority. We are so busy with life and filling ourselves with external noise in order to avoid the internal noise that we cannot connect to God. In Psalm 46, starting in verse 8, come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease in the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. This is another one of those God is our fortress passages, right? But notice he's talking about wars and God's power to end wars and to do away with things that are just consuming you. And what do you think men do when they're in wars? But Israel, what did they do? They were looking for allies. They were looking for ways to win wars. And what does the psalmist say? When you're in the middle of wars, God's the answer. Just stop and know God, and He'll take care of it. He's your fortress. Your life is full of battles. Battling self, battling temptation. And sometimes what we have to do is be still and know God. And that's the opposite of what we're doing, because as we pointed out, what we do is we run around as much as possible, distract ourselves with everything we can and as much noise as we can until we're literally exhausted so much that we cannot fall asleep. And then what do we do when we go to bed? We pull out our phones and we doom scroll until we finally fall asleep. We get up and start it all the next morning. And here's what I want you to know. If the only time you connect to God is when you come to this place, you're not connected to God. You cannot connect to God by simply attending church 3 hours a week. Not in the way that we're talking about. Here's what I want you to know. There is a difference between following Jesus and playing church. There's a difference between being religious and being transformed. There's a difference between claiming to be a Christian and walking with Christ. Andrew Sullivan said this: modernity slowly weakens spirituality by design and accident. In favor of commerce, it downplayed silence and mere being in favor of noise and constant action. The reason we live in a culture increasingly without faith is not because science has somehow disproved the unprovable, but because the white noise of secularism has removed the very stillness in which it might endure or be reborn. Did you get that? The white noise of secularism has removed the very stillness in which your faith could endure or be reborn. If churches came to understand the greatest threat to faith today is not hedonism but distraction, perhaps they might begin to appeal to a new, frazzled digital generation. Here's what I'll tell you. We are all tired, we are all exhausted, and we're all anxious, and it's all for the same reason. And what we need to do is turn off our phones and turn off our TVs and go find a quiet place, whether that's your deck, your car, your mower, walking with your dog, your closet, but shut the world out and spend some time with God. The reason I don't have peace that passes understanding is because I don't spend enough time with God to hand Him the anxieties that are destroying me from the inside out. How do you do it? Real quick. This is not in your bulletin, so you need to write this down if you want to on the side, but real quickly. Number one, find that quiet and still place. And that could be a lot of places, by the way. It could be on the water. It could be in your closet. It could be on your deck. Find that quiet and still place, free of distractions. Then go there and be still. I know that's hard. I don't know how much I've spent for people in my family on fidget things. I mean, we've got magnetic rubber balls, and we've got little things we rub, and we've got all these fidget toys. Leave those out. But wait a minute, that's uncomfortable. Exactly. There's going to be a little bit that's uncomfortable. Go to the quiet place and be still. And quiet that inner dialogue. How do I do that? My God is my rock. He is my refuge. He is my fortress. He is my stronghold. He is the God of my salvation. You know what should quiet your inner dialogue is the dialogue of what God is. He is sovereign. He is great. And He is more powerful than any of the problems you might experience. You listen, you wait, and you pray. But don't pray with many words. Because many words aren't needed. Sometimes all you need to say is, "Deliver me, Lord." By the way, that prayer is just as powerful as one that is 500 words long. And put your faith and trust in God. I will confess to you that for much of my life, I have not been good at this. My life was filled with entertainment and practices and parenting and work and everything that it could be filled with, and there was no peace. Find your way to find solitude and silence, just like Jesus did. Because if I want to walk like Him, and He needed to go to a quiet, silent, desolate place, so do I. I encourage you to think about these things, and I challenge you to practice it this week. Because only when I do this can I have the kind of faith that says, no matter what happens, good or bad, it is well with my soul. Most of you know the story of the song, that when he wrote this song, he is at a location in the middle of the ocean where his children died. He is going to meet his wife, who sent him a telegram that said, "I alone am left." And as he sat there in the quiet of that moment in that ship, the silence and solitude, these were his words. May God help us to find the peace that says, no matter what happens, it is well with our soul. Let's stand. Let's sing together.